The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take their organization to the next level. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how companies allow poor decision-making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organizations. Each week, we discuss stories where companies must pay large fines, lose great talents, and even stain their reputation within the community. And then we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson, ladies and gentlemen, in every story. How are you doing this fine day, Mr. Chuck Simikian, our Chief HR Officer?
Ho, ho, ho. It is December, and I am getting into the spirit. I'm not Chuck, I'm Santa. Ho, ho. Okay. Yes, I'm Chuck. And in fact, today's story has to do with a holiday related event that many people are familiar with. There have been songs written about it, tales told throughout the ages, and we are bringing it to you today here on the HR Stories podcast from an HR standpoint. Today, we delve into a case that shook the foundations of the North Pole, a story of exclusion, discrimination, and a fight for justice. Folks, today I'm your guide through this complex tale. Today's story isn't just any narrative. It's a lesson in what goes wrong when workplace discrimination goes unchecked.
All right, I'm going to get intrigued by this. Who is our central character of this story?
Sure. Our central character, our story centers around someone named Rudolph. Rudolph was a toy delivery technician apprentice with a very unusual cosmetic characteristic. It was a shiny nose, and that was a feature they say, if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows.
Are you going to sing for us as well today?
John, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is serious business. Anyways, this is something that should have been celebrated. Instead, John, it became a source of ridicule and exclusion.
That sounds like a workplace case of discrimination and harassment.
Well, here's the deal, John. Rudolph was constantly harassed by his coworkers and management. You know, they laughed at him. They called him names. They never let him play in any Reindeer games, which, by the way, were actually cleverly disguised exercise and training sessions for the newer employees.
I love that concept of using gaming to help our new employees learn what's required of them from their job and their organization. But I think if I recall, they were making fun of his red nose. How did management deal with this?
You know, I got to tell you, it got so bad, and I'm going to get it. The people, they would bully him so much, calling him a red-nosed. People thought that was his real name. That was his middle name, Rudolph Red-Nosed Reindeer. It was horrible, but that's where it gets even more troubling. Rudolph went directly to the top. Santa, known as Santa Claus, who was the CEO.
What did he say?
Ho, ho, ho.
Wait, are you saying he just said ho, ho, ho? That seems really insensitive when you have an employee coming to you, an apprentice coming to you with an issue.
Yep. According to all the evidence. It was more of a ho, 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 like almost like, hey, hey, making fun. He basically ignored Rudolph's plight. And because of this response, the harassment got worse and it continued. Everyone thought then, well, they could joke about this perceived disability.
So yeah, and then so if Rudolph quit, that would have been constructive discharge, right? Which you talked about
Yeah.
in a podcast. I think it was two, 3 or 4 podcasts ago, where a constructive discharge means that the employee has no other choice but to quit. Did that happen in the story? What happened?
Well, there is an interesting twist here. Rudolph did quit, by the way. He went away. He walked away, but he ended up coming back because the harassment did continue, right? But then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, well, okay, Santa actually needed Rudolph's unique nose to guide his sled. And only then was he acknowledged. Specifically, Santa said, and this is from all the evidence that I've been able to put together, all of the documents, that Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight? It was only then that the other reindeer loved him and, get this, John, shouted out his name with glee.
All right, so when they was needed, right, when his expertise was needed, then he was promoted, then he was offered a job. Boy, that sounds kind of backhanded. But Chuck, how does this relate to employment laws? Come on, this is the HR Stories podcast. You're telling me about this story. How does this
Absolutely.
relate? What are you trying to get at here?
Okay, so under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, under their guidelines, Rudolph's treatment clearly constitutes a hostile work environment. The constant harassment based on a perceived disability is a textbook violation.
That's fascinating and quite disturbing. So let's talk about the legal action Rudolph could take or did take.
Yeah, ultimately, Rudolph, lawyered up, intending to sue for years. This was not out. This was stuff that I had to dig up, because when he did walk away, he walked away. He was put himself in clear and present danger. He lawyered up, and he was going to sue for years of abuse and harassment. But then the legal claims actually centered around workplace harassment and a violation of the ADA, plus, get this, Santa's failure to take corrective action.
Right. And so Santa was the CEO, right? The leader of the organization. Seems like there was a strong case. What was Kringle Incorporated, Santa's company? What was their response?
They denied the allegations, saying Rudolph never reported the issues to HR. But that defense doesn't hold up if the harassment is pervasive and open, as it was. There are video closed circuit cameras that have clearly showed this. But in addition, there was no handbook or policy, as well as harassment training, which would really not have played out well in court. Plus, Rudolph was also harassed by an agent of the company, of the organization, known as Comet.
All right. So before I go on, I want to ask you a question about this. So Rudolph, right? So any employee, if they haven't gone to the organizations, like if they haven't gone to HR, they haven't gone to their manager, they haven't gone to their supervisor, if it's still out in the open and still pervasive, the company should have known about it, right? They should have known about it, and it should have been addressed. And in this case, it wasn't obvious. It was known, well known. We saw it in the training videos. We saw it play out. That's a really important part that we miss sometimes, because we think, oh, the employee has to report it to us. But if it's pervasive enough and out in the open enough and people are recognizing it, then that's still enough for that legal case as well.
Yeah, and they're not been there, and also you're forgetting that management did know. Rudolph went to the CEO, mentioned something, and also Comet, the one of the senior leaders there, actually saw it happening and then participated in the harassment. So then it became pretty prevalent and out in the open.
And so Comet, right, was one of the leaders of the sleigh team that Rudolph was training to be on. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And so Comet's one of the senior leaders, and he was specifically in charge of getting the team in shape by conducting these mandatory exercises that I mentioned, the reindeer game sessions, on behalf of the organization.
You know, Chuck, we're talking about this, but I just realized Kringle is incorporated in the North Pole. This is we don't talk about the North Pole here at HR Stories. We're a United States podcast.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do to me here? Does U.S. law apply up there?
Well, I'll tell you what. Okay, great observation. Technically, yeah, the North Pole is beyond any jurisdiction of any single country, including the U.S. It's a bit like international waters, okay? A place of shared interests, no single country's territory.
So Santa's Workshop, Chris Kringle Incorporated, was technically doesn't fall under U.S. law.
Yeah, in the real world, yes, that would be correct. But here on the HR Stories podcast, we are telling stories as a means to understand those complex issues in a, let's say, simpler context.
So it's more about the lessons we learn from the story rather than the geographical technologies. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Look, whether it's the North Pole, a company in California, a startup in New York, the principles of fair treatment, non-discrimination, and inclusive workplaces are universal. And by using this, what I would consider a familiar and beloved story, we can highlight a lot of these important issues, and hopefully it resonates with everyone and not just legal experts.
All right. Well, that is the magic of storytelling. So let's kick this off. Right? We suspend the inconvenient fact that the location of the company is in the North Pole. We're throwing that out. The case still provides a real world perspective on important law principles. And I think that was your point through all of this. So where did Kringle Incorporated go wrong? What laws did they potentially violate?
Sure. We're going to start with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and how it applies to Rudolph. So the ADA is crucial here. It defines a disability as a physical or mental impairment that limits life's major activities. See, Rudolph's glowing nose doesn't limit his activities. However, the ADA also protects and I mentioned this earlier, perceived disability, or those perceived to have a disability, which is exactly what happened to Rudolph.
So perception's the key, right? Perception being the key, that everyone around them thought that his shiny nose, as it glows, was a disability in his role as a reindeer, sleigh reindeer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was different. It was different, and it was a cosmetic, some would have called it a cosmetic disfigurement of sorts, and people were uncomfortable, very uncomfortable around it. It was really odd. It was really odd. But the ADA prohibits that harassment based on disability. So the ridicule and exclusion that Rudolph faced from his coworkers could be seen as a hostile work environment, which is a violation. Serious violation.
So what would Santa's, the owner, the employers, responsible been have in this situation?
See, Santa's role is critical here. Employers, as an employer, you need to take those steps to prevent and correct harassment. Failure to act, especially when you are aware of it, as in Santa's case after Rudolph's complaints, can lead definitely to employer liability. It opens up that gate.
And retaliation, would that be a concern too?
Yep, absolutely. Retaliation is big with the EEOC and the ADA, and they both prohibit it. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits it against an employee who complains about discrimination or harassment. If Rudolph faced any negative repercussions after his complaints, that's another legal issue. It just goes on and on.
So in this case, we know Rudolph, right, left under circumstances, quit. Would that be considered retaliation?
Look, here's the deal. While Rudolph's nose doesn't impair his workability, the ADA requirements for reasonable accommodation highlights the need for an inclusive workplace. There is definitely retaliation going on here. Plus, I would have to say, one of the corrective measures that we have seen in the now famous closed circuit television cameras that were there, okay, the security cameras, they put mud on Rudolph's nose without his consent. And that is not proper at all.
Wow. And so any other reasonable accommodations?
Not that I can think of at this time, but there are some other things that we didn't even breathe into this. Because we don't have time now to get into child labor law violations. I mean, exactly how old is Rudolph? Like 12 years old? 12 in reindeer years?
Well, I mean, that's a good point, right? And so we don't know. We do know Santa was really old. And so understanding that becomes really important. But we also have to think about Department of Labor, wage and hour violations. I every time never saw a time clock in there. That's not true. I did see a time clock in when they showed the dental kid, right? There was a time clock they punched in and punched out. But we don't know, were they done properly? How many hours in a day did they work? I think we need to do an investigation, Chuck. I think we need to go to the North Pole and check this out.
Well, the elves might have been clocking in and out, but what about the reindeer? How are they paying them? Look, they could have been pulling some serious overtime hours. They obviously, apparently once a year, they work 24 hours around the clock without a break. What's their proper compensation going on? Do they get coffee breaks? Do they get rest and relaxation breaks? Are there violations of, I don't know, OSHA perhaps?
Yeah, right. OSHA, right. What kind of system did they use? The harnesses and that kind of stuff. Wow. I think this looks like a safety nightmare.
Absolutely right. And what about those safety rails? I mean, on the rooftops, they land on rooftops. Sometimes it's very slippery. Could be raining, could be snow, could be ice, flying through blizzards, not without proper navigational lights. It's a wonder they haven't had more incidents, John.
They are magic. They are magic. It seems Santa Workshop could be a comprehensive HR overall. I love when we went through this, and I love that you kind of unpack some of this, Chuck.
Yeah. And okay, so we're joking around, I know, but there's that concept of MOUs. And when we talk about this, in other words, a memorandum of understanding, it's an agreement between different agencies. For example, if Department of Labor goes into a company and sees something, they might call their friends at EEOC, who might call their friends over at OSHA. And it just is like unpeeling an onion, and different agencies get involved in investigations and audits. But this is a classic case of a charming story masking some serious workplace issues, but it gives us plenty to talk about.
Yeah, plenty to talk about. And I love this because, okay, let's face it. We were talking about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, right? The famous story. But there are so many, and Chuck pointed this out to me, like, before we had this conversation about this podcast that we were going to do, it's a beautiful story. I like it. The person overcomes and shows that everyone is different and that difference is important. We need to embrace people's differences. It's a great story. But when you take that lens of human resources and put it on there, we now have cases of harassment and discrimination and other many violations of HR law. We hope we don't ruin the story for you, but it is good to know that we can find lessons in all types of stories where that makes us better as HR professionals.
Yeah. And John, the videos of Rudolph can be seen many times this time of year on television. You can go on YouTube. You can see clips of the closed circuit video security cameras of many of these incidents. And I will warn you, they can be disturbing. But the case also highlights the need for an HR, and as well as charming and fun and catchy. They sing songs, John. They sing songs that are still burning through my brain. But it does highlight the need for a proactive HR department. It's not just about addressing issues when they're reported. It's about creating an environment where such behavior is unacceptable in the first place. As you would put it, creating that culture.
Yeah, fantastic. So any other important lessons that we need to deal with?
Not that I can think of. HR professionals, remember the well-being of your employees is paramount. It's not just a good business or a good policy. You know what? It's good business.
That's fantastic. All right. Any other comments, Chuck, before we go?
No, folks, I would say make sure you join us next time as we uncover a compelling tale from the world of human resources featuring a girl named Red.
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glowed.
Oh my gosh, it's burning in my head. Folks, I got to tell you, we'll talk about serious issues with this Red and her delivery route interactions.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast.
The Misfit Toys, Kringle.
This has been the episode of Rudolph. Chuck has gone crazy.
Won't you guide my sleigh tonight? Then how the reindeer.
See everybody. Thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. Every story.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.